Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and you take time to listen into the podcast. Really appreciate you. And because you've been listening in, you helped us get ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes. So thank you for doing that. Appreciate you. So if you've gone on over and rate, subscribe, review, that'll help us keep the podcast going. And thanks again. All right. Now, today, I'm talking with Daisy Auger-Dominguez. All right, now let me tell you a little bit about Daisy. She's a sought-after speaker and author of the upcoming and highly anticipated book, Burnt Out to Lit Up: How to Reignite the Joy of Leading People. I mean, who doesn't need that? And she also has a book out, Inclusion Revolution: The Essential Guide to Dismantling Racial Inequity in the Workplace. And her insights have been featured in Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and several other leadership books. Daisy is recognized for her vision and her success. And I can't wait to jump into this conversation. Welcome, Daisy.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Robin. It's always embarrassing to hear about yourself, but I appreciate it, and I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Well, you've done such amazing work already just from our conversation earlier, I could tell. And so it's important for people to get that background about you.
Thank you.
And now I just said a little bit from your official introduction or bio. Now, why don't you tell us in your own words, first about you and then
Mhm.
about the work you do?
Sure. I'm a mother of a wonderful 15-year-old daughter. We live in Brooklyn. She, my husband, and I. I often start at the beginning because I was born in New York City, but I was raised in the Dominican Republic. My father is Dominican. My mother's Puerto Rican. My parents were teenagers when I was born, ill-equipped to raise me, and I had the greatest gift of all in grandparents that offered to raise me. And so I grew up with my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, in the DR, Dominican Republic, and there I learned English because I studied at an international school. I was essentially my grandparents' last kid. And so I came at a time when they had established themselves a bit more, and they were able to give me what they really couldn't give their younger kids when they were just starting out. And I always said I went to this international school with everyone's investment. This was my father helping, my grandparents helping. I'm sure there were other people that were helping, making sure that that I attended school with kids that were expats, kids that were children of industry in the island. And here was I, one of the few students that were working class, came from working class families, but with a deep commitment to giving me the education that they never had. And so I studied with kids from all over the world. My best friends growing up were Danish, Chinese, Israeli, Venezuelan, Cuban, Dominican, Puerto Rican, you name it. And that upbringing really set the tone for the way that I see the world, which is
Mm.
expansively, quite frankly, which is with a great deal of respect and admiration and appreciation for difference, while also respecting and revering national identity and culture. And on top of all of that, I was learning all of that while I was very much part of the majority, right? I was part of this international school, which presented this amalgam of cultures. But when I left school, I was part of a majority in the island where most people looked like me, one way or another. We are Caribbean. We are part of the African diaspora. We have every color you could possibly think of. But there was a sense of belonging and oneness with people that was strikingly absent when I moved to the United States as a junior in high school.
Mm.
I moved to the United States with my father because, again, like I said, the interest was not just always in my education, but also that I would study in the United States. I would go to college. And so my dad brought me my junior year so I could prepare to get my PSATs and SATs and do all those things that you don't do in the island as much. And that was my introduction to otherness. otherness that impacted me, because it was the first time that I was labeled Latina, Hispanic. Actually, back then it wasn't even Latina, it was Hispanic, right? And it was clearly this box that was a monolithic way of looking at a people that I knew were a lot more complex and rich in background and history. And that sense of otherness as a teenager is challenging enough. And as a young woman, trying to figure out my identity in the world. And so it was in high school here in New Milford, New Jersey, when I finished my 2 years of high school, that I started identifying and experiencing otherness, the painful side of it, the not understanding my culture, the being questioned for speaking English fluently. I literally had my English teacher would chastise the rest of the classroom when they would do something wrong and say, even the foreigner speaks better English than all of you. And he
Oh,
didn't
no.
mean any harm. I remember kind of going like, Mr. Smith, I've been speaking English since I was in third grade, right? Like people outside of the United States speak English well. This isn't an anomaly. I was questioned in terms of my college acceptances, right? I got into all the schools, and that was the first time that I learned about affirmative action. When someone, questioned my ability to get into these schools simply because of affirmative action. And in my naivete, I didn't even know what affirmative action was at that point. Quite frankly, this wasn't something that we talked about or learned about in my family, or that I hadn't learned in school. But I remember just sort of looking at this young white man that was questioning my acceptances and thinking, I get better grades than you. Right? I'm a better student than you. Like, of course I'm going to get into these schools. What is wrong with you? But always that undertone of otherness and less than-ness. And I carried that to university. I went to Bucknell University. I am a proud alum and trustee. I just joined the board a year ago. And
Congratulations.
thank you so much. It's a bit of a full circle story, but it was at Bucknell that I came to know my identity as a person of color in the United States. And it was it still is a predominantly white institution. But that was where I learned about social justice and where I started focusing on issues around race, class, and gender, right? Where I started trying to understand the dynamics around social identities. And that carried on. I did my master's in public policy at NYU. And then I entered corporate America. And so after all this time of, undergraduate, graduate work, I did a fellowship in public affairs. I was kind of trying to figure out my place in the world to do good, right? And social justice was something that just really moved me, and it felt right to me. And I spent a lot of time when I speak to folks now about race and racial identity and culture and DEI, which we speak about, such in these loose terms often. I often remember I was like, I've been studying this for a really long time. I've been living this for a really long time. But it wasn't until I went to the workplace where I truly experienced how it shows up in terms of access and opportunity, right? And there was a little bit of that in university, but I wasn't wise enough. I didn't know enough. It wasn't something that I was looking at. But it was in the workplace where I started seeing talented Black, Latino, men and women, Asian, and you name it, different identities, sort of quietly sidelined and marginalized at moments where it wasn't about their talent or skill, but it was about those things we didn't talk about, right? I'm like, oh, racial anxiety. We talk about these things now often, but these weren't even terms we use. A feeling of belonging. We didn't talk about that, but there was always this sense of, am I an invited guest in this workplace, right? Am I allowed into these spaces that I certainly, you hired me, right? I passed some tests to make it here. But yet socially, I'm not perceived the same way. And it wasn't something that I felt alone. It was something that I started seeing a trend and experiences for others. And so quietly, right? These are not things that when I say this to young people often. I was like, the way that I speak now is not how I spoke when I started working, right? When you're young and when you're new, or when like me, you don't come from experiences that helped you navigate corporate workspaces, you're just kind of trying to figure out what my place is here. Am I allowed to say these things? Am I allowed to question that these behaviors are happening? And slowly I started building my bravery muscles, right? I had very strong and open managers at the beginning of my career. Eventually, then things kind of got really bad. But at the beginning of my career, I had women managers, an Asian woman manager, a white LGBTQ woman, both of whom were caring and thoughtful and the best at their jobs, right? But also really intentional about how they built teams and how they nurture teams. And so I had a chance to see that done well, right? While I was seeing it not being done well in other spaces. And so it was like, a little bit of like learning along the way. What do I do? And I was a credit risk analyst at the beginning of my career. And then I landed in HR. I also managed the global foundation at Moody's when I was there. And then I transitioned into HR to launch the company's first diversity and inclusion function. And this was in 2007, 2008, when this work was still being talked about much more in the recruitment spaces, right? And the banking spaces, there were programs already. Advertising had a little bit, right? Some industries, service industries had D&I efforts, but they were really just programmatic and HR type initiatives that were focused a lot more on the hiring, not as much as you and I both know, on the key elements of retention and engagement and culture. So it was in the early stages of this work. And so I was approached to do this work because I was one of the few people of color that raised my hand to say, hey, I'll go to the Black MBA conference. I'll go to the Asian MBA conference. I'll go to the Latino MBA conference. Everyone's just like looking around like, why is this young person like, why is she into this? And it was because I just naively thought, well, if I do this, they will come, right? I was like, and if they come, and by they, it's we, then we will build the truly multicultural workspaces that I believed back then and still believe are possible. And so from there on, I've had several, as my grandmother says, jobs. I have these, Daisita has a lot of jobs, is what she says. And I worked at Moody's, at Time Warner, at Disney, at Google, at Viacom. Most recently, I was chief people officer at Vice Media. And I have, over the course of all of those roles and large institutions that I've worked at, have always centered in the space of D&I and eventually more expansive talent roles until my most recent role, really just looking at the full the full life cycle of employees and workplaces, and always looking at it from the lens of how do we create more access and opportunity? How do we address, right? Because it's hard to take away all the biases, but how do we address the biases that keep on getting in the way of everyone being able to thrive at work, right?
Mhm.
What does that look like? And how do we do it in a way that allows us to also be a competitive organization that attracts the best talent? So that's the work that I have been. I like to say it's not necessarily work that I just do, but it's work that I've been doing and work that I've been building on. And so
Mm.
I essentially help leaders, managers, individual contributors, and entire organizations transform how they show up for themselves, their colleagues, and their teams. I think that's how I like to frame the work that I do.
Yeah, yeah, and it brings together, your history of your career history, as you mentioned, all of it. What's your, official title?
Well, it's funny. I don't have a title right now because I'm in transition.
Ah,
I left Vice Media in August of last year. I took a radical sabbatical, and I called it that because I wanted to be intentional about creating a space that was nurturing and allowing me to come back because I had been suffering from severe burnout, as many of us are. And I currently write, speak, and consult with organizations globally on leadership and management. And when I'm at my best is when I am working inside an organization, helping solve the gnarly problems, right, that get in the way of people doing their best work.
good for
So
you.
so my t- so I love I love being in this liminal space right now of no official title. But the title that I use on LinkedIn, because we have to, this is the world that we live in, is I like to think of it as a multi hyphenate, right? I'm a speaker, I'm a writer, I'm a C-suite executive, and I am and I am a human just trying to do good work.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I'm guessing it's going to increase even more as your book gets, this latest book gets out there into the world more and more. Speaking of your latest book, and I mentioned it before, Burnt Out to Lit Up, How to
Yes.
Reignite the Joy of Leading People. Tell us about the premise of the book.
Well, when I wrote my first book, Inclusion Revolution, that was intended to offer a comprehensive strategy for embedding DEI across organizational structures. Burnt Out to Lit Up delves into the complexities of what it's like to reshape systems and to lead people. Because these are often fraught with setbacks and tensions and resistance and the things that deplete us. And I wanted to explore in this book the personal side of leadership, right? How do you stay healthy? How do you stay inspired? How do you maintain clarity? How do you maintain intention and focus when doing work that literally sucks the life out of you every single day? And so I wrote Burnout to Lit Up specifically for those who want to lead well, but are struggling with burnout and struggling with the unending demands on our time and on our energy and on our hearts given the what I call the mind bending world of work right now. And it's I also call it a no nonsense love letter to managers. It's a lot of this is hard. This is hard work. I'm not like, and it's not going to get any easier, but it's also a calling. And if you believe that you are on this earth, among other things, to lead people, right? To not just align them on goals and processes, because that's what a good manager does and a good leader does, but also to help bring out the best in people so they can bring out the best in whatever it is that you're creating. If you believe that that's your calling, then let me offer you a few research-backed insights and real life experiences of things that we can do to maintain our health and our safety so that we can show up for ourselves first and show up for those that we lead.
So important. It's such important work. Good for you for doing that. You
Thank you.
mentioned calling. Do you feel like this is your calling to get this message out, to teach others to do this kind of leadership?
I do. I do. I think that you know, we talk and this is, a lot of what you do. We talk about purpose and why we're on this earth. And I have some girlfriends that are so crystal clear of, what their highest and best use is. And I feel like over the course of my career, I've been getting there, but because I'm impatient and perhaps maybe because I'm a Gemini and I like to kind of just do a lot of things. I've always just thought I was like, oh, well, I do this and I do that and I dabble in this. But fundamentally, I believe that my purpose, my highest and best use is to create workplaces that work for everyone. And,
Mm.
and the way that I do that is by working with the individuals who set the tone for this work, who set the strategies, whose responsibility and sole purpose in organizations is to influence the experience of others. And I just, I've come to this place of this is what I'm here to do.
Was there a moment when you came to that place and said, "This is what I'm here to do," or did you just wake up one day and it was here? It had been here for a while, or was there a defining moment or a shift that happened at some
Yeah,
point?
that's such a great question. I think for me, I think maybe I'm a slow learner. I think so, I think I've had moments, right? I've had aha moments, and I think we many of us do. And I've had aha moments in in witnessing someone on my team just like find their flow and and or achieve the role of their dreams, and knowing that like I had a little bit to do with that. I've had moments, frankly, most of my moments come from when people mirror back to me their experience with me, right? Because I always say, I was like, I don't experience me, right? Like I don't see, I'm giving here and I'm experiencing others, but sometimes, I'm not for everyone, right? Some people may like what I'm saying, some people may not. But when I hear from others, the impact that I've had in their way of thinking, in their way of approaching decision making, in their way of thinking about their identity in relation to someone else's, or the things that I talk a lot about in Inclusion Revolution, how to ask better questions of ourselves and others. And when people come back to me and say, I was like, I've asked myself those questions and I've sat in that discomfort, right? That place that we don't want to be. None of us want to be. I certainly, I go in and out, right? Because it's a hard place to be. That gives me a great sense of satisfaction, and it then helps reinforce, yeah, this is exactly what I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't need to search for anything else. I am doing what I was meant to do.
Yeah, I love hearing that, and I'm hoping it's inspiration. I believe it is inspiration to someone who's listening and who might not quite know. They're in the thick of their career and not sure if this is my purpose or not. And hearing from you and getting feedback and recognizing the thing that you're doing is making impact, and impact is meaningful. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping that inspires someone today who's
Oh,
listening
I
and
hope so
looking
too. I
for their
hope so too.
purpose.
We all come to our purpose, and those things that light us up in different ways. And it's okay. And sometimes by by only looking externally at how someone else achieved it, we forget to look at all the beautiful signals around us that are telling
Yeah.
us you're right where you're supposed to be. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. You are having the impact you had dreamed of, but you never maybe. For me, I know it's. I've had moments where I'm like, oh, I need to re-articulate that because like the story I've been telling myself is not really the story. I was like, this is actually what I'm supposed to be doing, and it takes time to refine that over time.
It does, and as we change and evolve, it does at some point too, so, yeah,
Yeah.
I love hearing that. Um, I could guess at the answer, but is the idea of having purpose, having a sense of purpose in your work important? Do you think it's important for people to have you or people to have?
Yeah, I think purpose is what generates, your sense of self and how you engage with others, right? It's that fire in your belly, right? We call it different things. For me, I call it the fire in my belly. It's the stuff that like lights me up that, when people see me, my eyes light up and I was like, that's like that I'm in purpose right now. I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And that kind of, that kind of energy, only when it hits you, right? Only when you feel it. But I think it's incredibly important to me because I know that it's what lights me up, to not just do the work that I do, but also to persist despite obstacles. Um,
Yes.
when things get in your way inevitably, and if anybody who's listening is doing culture changing work, or is leading anything that there may be potential opposition for, which is probably everything in life, you know that you will hit obstacles, you know that you will hit resistance, that there will be tensions, unsaid things that you're questioning, sort of, am I doing the right thing? What's going on? And there's those moments of reflection. And I believe deeply in self reflection. It is, I live. People tend to think that I'm an extrovert, and I always have to explain to folks, I'm like, I'm actually much more of an introvert than you think. I certainly, engage with people and get a lot of energy from people, but I manage my energy very differently. I don't manage my energy with people. I manage my energy alone, right? And in reflection mode. And it's in those reflection modes and those moments of deep inquiry where your purpose just kind of like calls you. And it's in those moments where I'm reminded, especially when I'm going through something really tough. It's like that's what brings me back. That's what brings me back. And I was like, nope, I see you, obstacle, and I'm going to figure out how do I get around it, or I'm going to ask myself, I could be wrong. What am I doing wrong? Right? How do I get there? Because I still want to achieve this. What does that look like? Does that change somehow? Does that, do I, is that goal that I had 10 years ago the exact same goal that it is now? Probably not. With experience, with knowledge, with, all the things of, the wisdom perhaps that we get in age. It's like maybe maybe that's not what I'm going for, but maybe it's a different version of that. And it's in those moments where I'm reminded, I was like, but that's still my purpose. I'm still in the path to achieve that. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a bit convoluted because life is convoluted, but I do think that purpose is what energizes us to find the better, the better version of ourselves, if you will.
Yes, and to your point about reflection being key and knowing and understanding, and I recognize an introvert because I too am one, just like you. I manage my energy, which people are surprised because, I teach as a profession and I do this and all these other things and speak. And I'm like, yeah, I like your definition of how you manage energy is different. Yeah,
Yeah.
through reflection, and reflection is absolutely key. All right. So now, what would you say? What part of the book, and this is the one,
Yeah.
Burnt Out to Lit Up, what part of the book reflects who you are?
Oh goodness. In this book, and we were talking earlier about writing multiple books, and I think you become better the more that you write. This book was meant to be very personal to me. So the entire book is about me. I use a lot of humor because that's how I engage with folks, storytelling. And I share a lot of stories that are uncomfortable. I share a lot of stories that are about me failing, right? About me not knowing, and when others or when I felt others failed me, right? And I want to be intentional about that because sometimes me feeling someone failed me may not be how other people experience that. But I share that, and so it's very much me because it goes deep, very humbly and vulnerably into what it takes to lead people and what it can do to you when you don't protect yourself and others around you from the harm that can happen when we work ourselves to the bone, when we feed into narratives that are about someone else's self-worth, not yours. When we reach limits in relationships and we keep on pushing through and we realize like why am I still trying? Right? Like why like this is, I can gently still treat you with humanity and dignity, but I can gently separate myself and find a space that honors me and what I want to do in this world. So I would say the whole book is very much me in my quest to be a better person and be a better leader.
Yeah, yeah. I hear, the wisdom that comes from a lot of, self-awareness and reflection as I hear you speak. All right, so now this podcast is leadership purpose, right? So it's leadership purpose, but
Yes.
I started the podcast for what I call high achieving women.
Hmm.
And I always give my definition of high achieving women because it's a general term and everybody can mean different things. So let me tell you what I mean by it.
Yes.
Uh, High achieving woman, a woman who is responsible, goal oriented, ambitious in a good way.
Hmm.
And it could be one or more of any of these.
Yeah.
Uh, she is the one in her professional life. People come to her and ask questions for advice, want to, get her opinion on something or advice. At
Hmm.
home, in the personal realm, family, friends, community, they come to her no matter what it's about, they come to her, and I see you nodding like you recognize this. And she's the one and she's good at a couple of things. So people feel like, well, she probably doesn't need any support because they see her doing all the things. So I thought, oh, why don't I create a podcast where we can all come and talk to each other? And especially those who are at places in their professional journey where they're thinking to themselves, there must be more. There must be more than this.
Hmm.
And they're yearning for more meaning and they're yearning for purpose and craving it. And it might show up it might look like burnout. You were talking about burnout. It might look like that, but they're at this place of really recognizing that they need more meaning and purpose in their work. So
Hmm.
that's the woman we're talking to right now. All right. So
I
with
love
her
it.
in mind, what's something from either your professional experience or your personal experience that you could give to her as a word of advice?
Goodness, I was gonna quote my book, but I have to say I went to a lovely event today, and we were asked to share, it was all women in the maternal health space. And we were asked to share affirmations with each other. And one of the women shared with us, not an affirmation per se, but a saying that her mother told her throughout her life. And it's cultivate the relationships with women in your life because they will bring you through life. And I was so taken by that. And, for those of us who are high achieving, who are, first gen, oldest daughters, first to go to college, all those titles and weights that we carry, we don't have to do it alone. And sometimes we fall into that trap, and we forget that to build and cultivate relationships with women, it's about intentionality. It's about taking time and effort to build relationships because the women in our lives will see us through our lives, right? They will lift us up when we need to. They will check us when we need to be checked. They will send us the flowers that we deserve. They will hold us through the gnarly and the scary and the dark, and they will also show us the way. And so I just feel inspired to share that because there's a lot of tips and tools that I could share and talking about, that I share in Burnt Out to Lit Up. But I think there's nothing more powerful than to surround yourself by women that will see you through life.
Okay. All right. And I'm inspired by that. So I'm guessing somebody else is. All
Hopefully.
right. I mean, Daisy, you've been so generous with your time. Is there anything else before we tell people how they can be in touch with you? Is there anything else you want to share that maybe I forgot to ask? Or is something popping in your mind saying, I have one more thing?
Oh my gosh. I just want to say thank you for creating the space. And thank you because what I've seen work, what has proven to work for generations, is millions of people acting in millions of different ways across millions of moments, helping and supporting each other. And this is one of those. So thank you for contributing to, the betterment and the love and the growth that we all deserve.
Well, thank you for saying that. All right. So where can people hear more from you, learn more about your book and your work? And if they want to reach out to you, how can they contact you?
Oh goodness. Well, I always say my community is LinkedIn, so you can find me at Daisy Auger-Dominguez. I also dabble in Instagram often. I have a website which is also my name, Daisy Auger-Dominguez. I have a book out, Inclusion Revolution, and I have my second book, Burnt Out to Lit Up, coming out in September. And you will see and hear from me a lot in the next couple of months. So if you reach out, I'm always happy to connect.
That's wonderful. Thank you again for being here. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your response to our episode today. I too spend most of my time at LinkedIn, and you can reach out. I'm on all the social channels, but I spend most of my time on LinkedIn at Robin L. Owens, PhD, Robin L. Owens, PhD. I'd love to hear from you. Or pop on over to the podcast website, leadershippurposepodcast.com, leadershippurposepodcast.com. And if you're looking for more meaning and more purpose in your work, you'll find a free resource there. Until next time, this is Dr. Robin.